This is Season 1, Episode 10 of Mastering the RPG, a tabletop RPG podcast all about upping your game. It doesn't matter if you're a game master or player, you'll find advice, ideas, and some pretty strong opinions. Our episode tonight, playing with social skills, or can I roll to see if they're lying? Welcome to Mastering the RPG. Like I said, it's a tabletop RPG podcast all about maximizing your game. We've got ideas, cool stuff found, opinions. I'm Carl with my co-hosts Eric and James, and you'll find all our information at masteringtherepg.com. That's one word. And if you want us to talk about something that you're interested in, adjudicate a problem, Eric would really like to do that, or you just have questions, Game Master at masteringtherepg.com. Send us an email. That'd be great. So, hey, guys, once again, it's great to be on the mics with you.
It's good to be on the mic with you as well, sir.
And that's
bully.
and that's no lie, gentlemen. Welcome. Hello, everyone.
All right. So, why don't we just get right into it? We do have tonight a cool stuff found. We have cool stuff found. Do you copy? Cool stuff found. Over. So tonight we have a cool stuff found, and it's found by Eric. Eric, would you like to go ahead and let us know the interesting, crazy thing that you want to tell us about?
I absolutely will. Yeah, this is almost a sub-genre of cool stuff where I like to call it like Game Corner or I don't know. We'll have to come up with a catchier name, but this is another game I'm bringing to the podcast. Unlike the last one, which was specifically developed for tabletop games to like work on role-playing, this one was not, but it pretty much is a directed improv session with a fantasy twist. So I think it's perfect if you want to like have a really fun time and then also kind of work on role playing, because that's what it's all about. So what we have today is called Dark Overlord, made by Fantasy Flight Games. They call it kind of Dark Overlord. It's kind of a fantasy party game. And now just to say up front, I have an older edition called I have the yellow box or the red box, and there's a newer version called the yellow box, I think, or the red box, one of those. And one of the colors are kind of
there's just a different color.
Inconsequential, but
that's important. Yeah,
but the newer one has more cards in it and some extra rules. So I'm only talking about the original one, but it pretty much is still the same game. So starting out, what is Dark Overlord? Well, the overall feel of this is one player gets to play the role of the Dark Overlord. Think of your over-the-top Sauron or any type of, evil character, evil villain. And all the other players are the kind of bumbling, pathetic, overly sucked up goblins that are his minions. And basically the Overlord has given them a task, a quest of some sort, and it's utterly failed. And this is like the meeting afterwards where they're basically all trying to get out of getting under the Dark Overlord's wrath, and they're trying to shift blame to each other. And it gets more and more elaborate and over the top. The art is really charming. I don't know if I'm showing this to my co-host now. So basically, how does it work? Well, I'm just going to go over this very quickly. There's a bunch of different cards. It's completely made of cards. And there's 3 types of cards. There's hint cards, this is the meat of the game. And these have like a name on them, a picture, and kind of a description. And I'll explain more about this later on. Then there's the action cards, which are this is how you play these to shift blame or to like mess with another player. And then there's the Dark Overlord's cards, which are the withering looks. And this is what he gives to players that kind of provoke his wrath. And they're really, really funny because it uses this fun mechanic of like a camera zooming in. So for the first one is like a farther away one, and then the second one is like a closer up version of his look, and then the third one, if you get this, that means you've basically been killed, where he's looking at you real tight. So that's when you know. So
Eric's showing like these cards where it kind of like zooms in. Each card is like zooming in onto his face.
And the basic setup is everybody's given 3 hint cards, 3 clue action cards. And the Dark Overlord starts. You pick a player to be the Dark Overlord. Doesn't really matter. They start by coming up with some quest that they gave the goblins. So the examples they give in the book, like, "Well, my brave servants, I ordered you to kidnap the princess and bring her to me. Did you carry out your mission?" Or like, "Slaves, did you raise the village near the small bighorn to the ground as I ordered you?" So he comes up with some type of quest that has failed, and then you pick a goblin, and then they basically have to play one of their hint cards and then gain inspiration from it. So they can use the title of the card, they can use the picture. So some of the ones here, like here's the bridge over the river, and then it says Katara's bridge over the river Drake. And it has kind of a picture of like a creature falling from a bridge in a canyon. Or like the wicked elf, and has a picture of a female elf called Odium Ka, and it says the icy and mysterious lady of possibilities. The flying ship, the drill elves flying galleon. So it really just, there's like a ton, I mean, there's like 100 cards, over 100 cards in here of just all different types of, the fashionable shoes, master shoemaker's quaint creations. So it really just runs a gamut, and you use these to, when the Dark Overlord first pays attention to you, you go, "Oh, well, I was going to get back the potion for you, sire, but these shoes caught my attention, and I had to get them for you, and I went to get them, and I got ambushed by guards." And then you would then pull another card, and you can use the pass the buck card, which is the one you say, "But then, Smorgasbord over there," and I have here the spiteful succubi. He had a bunch of succubi with him that seduced me and took me away from my mission. And then you basically pass the buck to that goblin, and then the other player, then he has to then use one of these cards to kind of put up with an excuse. And it kind of goes around like that, where you're using these. You use your own card to like give an excuse, and then you use a pass a buck card and another hint card to like come up with an excuse. And it kind of goes around that until one of the players has kind of spurred the Dark Overlord's anger, and he gives you one of those withering looks. And going to the Dark Overlord, he has a lot of power. He has to. You're encouraged to keep the other players at kind of a razor's edge, so you can interrupt them at any time to demand further explanation on something. You can just introduce new elements by yourself or by pulling a story card and using that, a hint card. You can rebuke them, no matter whose turn it is. If somebody's spoken out of turn, you're encouraged to be this overbearing, arrogant, all-powerful lord.
Perfect.
And then when they've kind of wrathed or angers, if they're stumbling and kind of, they kind of has a loss for words, and you go, "Oh, you've wrathed my anger." Being boring, being repetitive. For a lot of these reasons, they're encouraged to then give you one of those withering looks. If they're not respectful if they don't call you, if they call you like boss and whatever, gave jokes at your expense, like that's absolutely not okay, right? They have to give you the utmost respect. So they really encourage all of this. And then once somebody has the third withering look, there's kind of another plea that a final plea they can give before like the executioner's blade, where they can come up with one more excuse. And then if that's not okay, then they get the third one and they're out of the game. So I kind of went over the rules pretty quickly. But that's the basics of it. So yeah, the meat of the game is definitely these hint cards. And I would say it's a really, really, really fun, over the top. I mean, you can really get into these characters as you heard, and it really just encourages you to role play. And that's why I think it fits with our kind of, in our world, right? In our tabletop world, is that, it's a trope that's easy to get behind. We all know the kind of over the top and the bumbling servants. It's in the fantasy genre, which, let's be honest, that's the most of tabletop gaming, right? Like 70%, I would say,
sure. Yep.
At least. And it's just a really, really fun game. Now, there is like an alternative rule set here that's more like mechanical. I don't think it's actually that good. I prefer just go with the more like open-ended, more just improv-y one. Again, with the last game too, you want to have a good group to go with this. If people are going to be like offended, or you don't want to be overly mean, you don't want people to be like offended if they've gotten a withering look. This is all for like good fun, but it will encourage role playing, and I think it will even help people to role play because there's these hint cards. It does give you some kind of inspiration to kind of go off of. So I think anything that kind of encourages, how do I role play? Like, I've never done improv before. This is a structured improv game, basically. So it really will help like your gaming group, foster kind of more, this is how you kind of draw. And the yes and, right? You have to pass the person to somebody else and they have to go from that and then say something else. So it also encourages that yes and, which is actually a perfect fit for today's episode. I'm glad I talked about it now for today's episode because this kind of goes into social role playing and everything. So you guys have any comments or questions?
So how long does the game go? How does a typical session?
It's pretty quick. I would say it goes pretty quick. I mean, I think on the box, they say it's definitely going to be, maybe at first it's a little bit slower, but I mean, I would say it's definitely for under 30 minutes. I mean,
so you could use that as like a warm up for your group even.
Yeah. I mean, it's like those any like
out.
party games. Yeah. You can do it as a warm up before the game. You can do it on like a game night. You can do it just for if you're waiting for somebody to come or whatever. Yeah. I would say 20 to 30 minutes. Definitely is more than enough time. And you can switch, even with that amount of time, you can switch who's the Dark Overlord, right? When somebody loses, then that person can then become the Dark Overlord. If you've gotten the third Withering Look, then they have the chance to kind of become the arrogant one. So yeah, it's really, really cool art. I think it's good for, a lot of different ages of players. So kids, adults, I think it's kind of a fun, and you can see people playing this online. There's a bunch of different videos, people playing it, and it's a really fun, funny, engaging game.
Very cool. That's pretty neat. I like the
Sounds
graphics.
Absolutely incredible. Spontaneous and fun, and I've got to say, look, you can't see it from where you are, but Eric's been showing us the artwork. It's got a Munchkin-esque kind of vibe to it, which looks really cute. I think people will really get into that. That sounds actually really super fun. Good warm-up exercise for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
So now you just have to figure out how we can play that on a virtual tabletop, and we could play it in our group.
There might be a tabletop simulator version. I don't know. So
it happened. Yeah. There's a tabletop simulator version for goddamn anything.
Practically, right?
There'll be one for sure.
You know what? If we might play it and record it, and then we could release it as a bonus. We'll see. I mean, I don't know. Anything's possible. So.
Oh, sure. Take the guy who can't run tabletop simulator out of the game. All right, but with that being said. All right. Well, that was exactly the kind of thing that we like to do for Cool Stuff Found. And now we're going to head over to talking about those social encounters and the main topic.
Mastering the RPG with Carl, Eric, and James. Yeah.
All right. It's time for the main topic. We're talking about social encounters. Can you roll to see if somebody's lying? We'll get to that. But let's go ahead and start off. It's like, what exactly do we mean by a social encounter or social interaction or, the social part of the game? James, when we talk about that, what does that mean to you?
For me, it means the crux of role-playing games, to be honest. Role-playing games are social games by their very nature. And often we hear things called the three pillars of role-playing games, which might be combat is one of them, where you've got to get into the nitty-gritty and the dice rolls of actually the conflict and the combat. We might have the exploration phase, which is discovering clues and setting up your plot for the game. But the third pillar, which I actually think is the one that most people enjoy the most, but it's also the most, it's growing in terms of popularity, is this social aspect of the game, where essentially you're playing, you're taking on your role, you are interacting with the dungeon master or games master who's role playing a non-player character, and it's that negotiation to and fro, chatting with an NPC for some kind of goal, for some kind of outcome. And so these social encounters, which could range from everything from swindling a poor hokum to negotiating an outcome of a trade settlement with another kingdom. It's these social interactions with rules set aside for them that form part of a major structure of these role-playing games. So at least that's my take on it. Eric, how about you?
Definitely similar. I think there is something to which I think people get caught up in when they're like, oh, there's the face character, because there's a mechanical side to the skills part, the social skills part. And some games even have like extra like feats or edges to help with, being a good quote unquote face character. And I think there is a thing that we should always watch out for, and I think it is growing, where we almost want to. It's almost a good thing to kind of separate those out, because I think it's good to encourage players who are not face characters that they can still, of course they can still role play, but also still interact, and they can even bring something to the table. Just because you're not a face character doesn't mean that you cannot still speak up and be social, right? You're just not good with what I consider the main kind of, if you could go overall like skills, or however they're called, of like persuasion, deception, intimidation, charming, and then of course like reading body language, whatever that is. Those are the main kind of, and then negotiating, which could be a combination of all those other ones. That I think is still a good split between people who are like mechanically good at that, and we should still encourage other people to still role play. I mean, I've had a lot of characters that are not face characters that still, I will draw back from when like, okay, this is the time for that person to shine. I think it's still good to get other players involved in that occasionally. And like my Kobold character in your game, James, who is horrible at social stuff, but he will still like have his moment of speaking up in a social thing besides just role playing with the other player characters. So I think there's kind of like two things there.
And you've touched on some, sorry, go Carl.
No, feel free. I was just going to say, for myself, all it's absolutely true, right? The whole point of R in the RPG is it's a role-playing game. But I kind of, when I think of social encounters and kind of the social interactions, it ties off to kind of what Eric was saying. There's skills that are specific to drive interaction, and I'm thinking of NPCs, creatures, whatever. It's me interacting with these people in the environment, role-playing that out. So I kind of separate that a little bit, the encounter side, from just the players getting together, going back and forth, doing verbal jousting with themselves. But there's something where I'm trying to get a desired outcome. And it can be verbal, it can be nonverbal. That glance from across the room, I'm trying to persuade somebody to go do something, whatever. But I'm trying to drive kind of a discussion with the world, the game master who's running the world in a sense, to get a desired outcome, or have something happen the way I want it to happen, have somebody say something, whatever. So go ahead, James. What were you saying?
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more on these. And I guess as role-playing games have developed and as they've evolved, this element of the game has really expanded. If I think about, when I first started role-playing, years ago, you might have had a charisma score, and that was about it. I know that, with the evolution of role-playing with things like World of Darkness, where suddenly charisma became manipulation and appearance, and now we've got things in Call of Cthulhu like fast talk and persuade, and Dungeons & Dragons with persuasion and intimidation and deception. There's a lot of nuance that's started to form into this. And so what you find is a lot of these encounters, there's actually a lot of rules that are kind of setting in the background now. A lot of role-playing games, as they develop, have quite not stringent, but quite structured rule sets about how you might go about setting up an encounter, a social interaction, so that there is winners, there is losers, there is the ability to succeed or fail. And I guess that's what we're talking about. And I agree, Carl, more than just I'm going to take on my voice and my persona and interact with the world. Yeah. An encounter has this structure to it, where there is a success or failure and there's a reward for succeeding in that social encounter.
And as you said, I think a really good way to look at it is that, like, in these games, right, the exciting part, the mechanics are all about conflict and conflict resolution. And for most, like in movies too, right, when you're writing a script, it's conflict. That's what drives a narrative. And at first it was like combat. That's the easiest conflict to get behind. How do you do conflict resolution with that? Well, you're good at shooting, you're good at swinging a sword. And then we look at like, well, there's a lot of other types of conflict in life, right? There's conflict, there's social conflict, and that actually usually dominates how things go. And that can be just as interesting. And you look at like movies and TV shows, right? There's a lot of movies and TV shows that have social conflict, and that is the main thing. You don't have to have a gun to have a good narrative. And I think, like as you said, James, games are starting to actually catch up with that now, of being like, you can have a full, robust social environment that has conflict and has multiple ways to look at it. And I even think video games, I can't remember the name of this game now, but there's a lot of video games coming out now, role playing games that are like hardly any combat at all, and have like complicated, social skills and feats, and that's what all the conflict is social. So yeah, I think it's an interesting direction we're headed in,
and I think all that really leads into the big question, right? As we've got games now that are adding a significant amount of rules related to social interaction. In the old days, right, you had swing the sword, shoot the gun, that kind of conflict. And I think you hit it right on the head. There's this other side of conflict. There's challenges with that now, right? The social interactions are fundamentally different than combat. There's just a difference to them. Yet, what I find very interesting is should we treat them the same or should we treat them different? For example, what about the player who's a smooth talker in and of themselves, right? So we got this framework, the persuasion, whatever, but this person's a smooth talker as a player. They're able to kind of, say the right things. They can, act courtlier and when they're interacting with the king. Does the game master give them the benefit of the doubt and say, that was great role playing, I'm going to let you succeed? What about the face character who has absolutely no social skills, but they want to be that face character because they want to role play, and they're just hoping that they can say, can I tell if this person is lying? Can I roll the die? Because I don't know how to do that interaction. And that's the biggest challenge, I think, that comes out of social encounters, right? None of us are swinging our sword around in our basement when we're rolling for combat, and it's perfectly normal. That's how you expect it. But there's this expectation sometimes that somebody can really role play out this social interaction, and that's going to determine success or failure in some cases, or a bonus or whatever. So I think I'm just teeing that up. That's a challenge. I'm curious what you guys think about that as a challenge compared to the other conflict, swinging the sword, which is kind of easy to adjudicate.
It's an emerging and consistent challenge in the games that I run, I must admit, Carl. I guess that some of the appeal of role-playing games and people that are drawn to these games are often social butterflies. And you'll find that there's one in almost every group that loves the acting, loves the role-playing, is probably very persuasive in real life and has quite high charisma in real life. And how do you then manage that interaction? And I must admit, like, I love a bit of role-playing when I'm dungeon mastering. I like to act out the motivations and the interaction, the toing and froing of a social encounter. But you're right, there are mechanics about it, and there is, in my mind, there's always the set baseline of let the dice actually determine the outcome. I've got, in our game that I run with Eric, we have a very verbose, very articulate lawyer that plays in our game, and she creates high social skill characters, and she has got a rapier-like wit when it comes to social encounters. She deals with a lot of nuance and will trip you up on your words if you're being a little bit careless. And that can be a challenge if you're the dungeon master with a very good social player. And so for me, I just make a persuasion rolls to see if it worked or not, because I find I struggle to compete with her in those instances. And so I'll often say, yep, well lawyered, well played. Now let's use a persuasion roll to see if that actually worked or not. And so, in my mind, having the frameworks of the rules is actually a benefit. You can structure it. Do
you give this person a bonus then? They were so glib.
Oh, hell no.
So okay, so you don't. All right, so
no. And the reason why, and there is a reason why. I mean, you could reward good role play, and there's a difference between good role play and good social competitiveness. If I reward good role play from the players that might not be overly verbose and articulate, if the motivation of their character is on display, if they're actually following through with the storyline of their character, then I would reward good role play in that instance. But in terms of bringing to bear a social skill around the table as a player as opposed to a character, I find it's a little unfair to reward someone who is actually naturally good at this. Because by the same token, I want to encourage other players who might not be so socially skilled to interact. And often and I'll talk a little bit about this later, often my stories will focus on characters who might not be so socially socially adept. The socially awkward characters I like to draw into role-playing social encounters because it becomes a challenge for them. In the same vein as a character who's not good at sword fighting still gets involved in combat, I still involve the characters who aren't good at social interactions into my social encounters. And if that's the case, then you can't really penalize someone for not being a good, active social role player. And so for me, it's just we're all rolling the dice to determine the outcome.
Get a lot of strong shaking heads for me here. Yeah. Eric, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, we've talked about this before in our player skill versus character skill. And this is the classic example is the social thing. And I agree with a lot of what James said. And I think universally, all three of us, what we keep talking about is don't penalize, essentialize, like reward, but don't take away. And I think when you come to social characters, face characters especially, the player skill versus character skill, that goes both directions. Like James was saying, either the person can be really good naturally, like the player can be really good naturally, or they can be really bad naturally. But it's ultimately their character and the mechanics that will define success or fail. I do think, though, it is good to reward if somebody's brought up something, especially like if they really had a good turnaround, or they said something that was really poignant, or on kind of was like a soft spot for that the person they're going against, right? I think it is good to kind of give a little bonus. And on the flip side, how you encourage that with somebody else, if somebody's making a character that is a really good persuasive character or whatever, but they themselves are not, still trying to encourage, well, you don't have to maybe act it all out and be the best improver, but you can still be methodical in how you okay, well, we looked up and we found dirt on this person or something, right? And then so when I'm discussing with them, I don't improv everything up, but I maybe as a not social person will be like, well, yeah, I start going in, deep with them, and I bring up the fact that we know about his letter to the Duke. Like, you can just say that without necessarily acting it out in the best, coming up with the best time to kind of put that out. And that's still, I think that's still okay as a GM, to let your player do that. And then you can be like, well, you get a bonus for that. Like, you brought that up. And your character's good at it. You might not be, but you took the time to still have that advantage. So you don't have to be necessarily naturally persuasive, but you can still be kind of methodical in that way, at least. To try to, come up with, what are things I can use?
And that's
I think there's also... Yeah, sorry, go on. No, I mean, just to the point of player versus character skill, and like you said, James, bringing other people into it, like I said at the very beginning too, I think it's really important to have the other players also social interacting. It should never be dominated by the face character. When it's the really, this is a high stakes social maybe narrative that we're doing, then that's the face's character's time to shine. But you should always try to bring in other players. And like you said, James, something that they're about, right? If there's something specifically that their thing is about, they should come into it. Because as you said, everybody gets to participate in combat. And pretty much most systems will give every type of class some type of combat role in whatever way it is. So it is, when you think about it, unfair then to kind of siphon off social to just face characters. So always look to ways to draw people in, but still let those face characters shine when they need to, because that is what their whole character's about, right? They're not as good as combat as the fighter. So they should still have that time to shine, but always bring in other characters. And as a player, I also tend to like my character in that game, James. I mean, he is not a socially good guy, but he will have times where he goes off because it's that is his thing, or he uses his intelligence a certain way. And I'm a pretty social person. I'm pretty, I like to talk, I like to improv, but I will hold back from making him too on point with certain things. Or want to get involved always because he's too scared and he gets stutters up. So I will make that conscious decision to, when there's times of, okay, this is, not his jam, to actually bring him back. And other times I will encourage him to be more forthright when it's something that he knows about, some type of invention, or he gets upset about something and he just is fed up. Right. So I think that's, as a player, even if you're not a face character, you should engage and not engage when it's the face person's time to shine. Sorry, I went off a little bit.
Well, yeah, I wanted to rewind a little bit of something you said, which was really, I thought, spot on. That we've been talking a lot about role playing, right? And getting into character and things like that. But you said something very important. You can drop out of character in social interactions to be able to represent things that you may not know how to talk about. And, and there's the classic, in my mind, if you guys are familiar with L5R, right? That's based somewhat on feudal Japan. It's a game.
Yeah.
Yep.
And you go to court and you need to understand all the nuances of court. And you have to, but I'm a person playing this game. I literally do not know all these things. And so you have to allow people to drop out of character and say, well, I'm going to show my respect to the Lord in a way that makes sense, or the Donyo in a way that makes sense. Okay, great. Let's roll the dice. I think I just wanted to make sure that I really stuck a dagger in that point you're making, that it's not always, you have to talk it out. You can drop out of character if it's important and you just don't know how to say it. I still would encourage role playing because we're in a safe space and it's fun to do. But yeah, you can drop out of character for doing things that your character would know that you don't know how to express because you don't know it. You're just a person playing a game. So anyway, that's all I wanted to jump in.
That even goes back to our last episode. Like, the person who's good at thieving and exploration is not always going to know, like, oh, how do you pick a lock? They don't know how to do that. They're just like, I picked the lock, right? So there is this kind of suspension of disbelief sometimes you have to give into yourself to, like, my character is good at this. And I have a gap in knowledge there.
I've got a fantastic 11-year-old little girl that plays a paladin in one of my games, and she's got intimidation of +7 on her dice rolls, and she's the most quiet-spoken, lovely little kid that you've ever met. And she finds it very difficult to actually come up with how you would intimidate someone because she's just not naturally like that. And so I watch her get flustered all the time, and eventually she just says, "Look, I just yell, can I roll?" And it's like, yeah, you can. You can yell and roll.
Yeah.
I call him a name. It's a bad name. Yeah. He gets upset.
It's really, really poignant. He hates it. It's really, really on point about something on it.
And so, all right. So that really, I think, does a really good job of talking about some of those challenges. There's one more that is the title of the show that we need to make sure we touch on, which is, because of social interactions and encounters, players expecting more insight than they can truly observe or get through this interaction. I'm not even going to, I've got my own opinions on this, but I'm going to hand it over. We'll hand it to Eric first on this one. How about that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is a heated topic, and I think with stuff like this is where metagaming leaks almost the most out of any other thing. With, like, do I know if he's lying? And then you roll the die. So here's my first thing about this. Even if your game doesn't have secret rolls, always make lying checks secret, I think. It just makes it much more interesting no matter what game it is. Because it's like, if you roll the die and you get a really high roll, right? And you're like, and you're asking if they're lying, and you're like, got a really high roll, and they're like, okay, they're not lying. Even if you're trying to be a non-metagame player, it's hard to ignore the fact that the knowledge that, oh, I know for a fact this person's not lying. And I think it really takes away from the more organic role playing. So something like Pathfinder 2e, it's a secret role, and let me tell you, it really creates a lot more dynamic drama as far as social interactions go by making it secret, because the GM rolls your die for you, adds your bonus. You have no idea whether you rolled high or low, so you have no idea if you actually believe them or not, and it creates a much more interesting experience. Besides that, I think and I think James will have a lot to say about this one, but keeping it limited to a certain amount of people, and also, especially in, like, fantasy games, I think we go too over. Like, a lot of these people, you might not. People should be usually taking negatives or something if this is a creature and a culture they just have no idea, almost alien to them, right? It's going to be a lot harder for them to read this person. And vice versa. If somebody is more used to a culture, even if they're not maybe that good at insight naturally, they might be a little bit easier to tell. So I think there's a lot more nuance than we give this credit to, and it's very much overused as far as, like, people constantly asking. For me, I think the big secret here is secret roles. It really cuts a lot of this stuff out and makes it more interesting. James, I know you probably have a lot on this topic, right?
I'm jumping at the bit here.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I take this in a little bit of a different frame. I do allow the players to roll their roles when they are trying to work out the motivation of the character, and I think this is a little bit different as opposed to is he lying? Insight check. I like to think that when I'm role playing my NPCs, it's about can you detect or determine what my motivation is? What am I aiming to achieve? What am I hiding? What am I, what is the motivation of the character in terms of this social outset? And I think this developed because of Call of Cthulhu. Call of Cthulhu has a skill. It is not insight; it's psychology. And so the idea being that trained psychologists actually get a good idea about people who are being shifty or evasive or overtly overconfident. And so it becomes a little bit more nuanced than just are they lying or are they not? And so in that instance, that insight role or the wits role, if you're playing World of Darkness, or the psychology role will allow you to determine a little bit more than just untruthfulness. It's not just a one-size-fits-all yes, no. All these roles are also, in the way I run it, they're always contested. So you will roll your role and I will roll my deception role or my fast talk role or my manipulation role, depending on what system I'm in. And then I, as a storyteller, as the GM, I will determine how much you've exceeded me or not. And so while I don't do secret roles, I drip feed the information based on the difference between the two dice rolls, if that makes sense. So if I'm being manipulative and I roll, let's say, a 12 on a 20-sided dice, and you're rolling insight and you roll a 14, well, you've only just gleaned a little bit more of information than what I'm willing to give out. If you roll really high and I roll really low, then that's a different ballgame. So I let the numbers and the dice decide how much information is there. So you can still glean some information if you roll poorly. You just might not glean very much, or it might be obviously diffusive. And it does, I agree with you, the metagaming part of this does become an issue, but it can also show that your opponent is very good at this too. I roll an 11. Oh, I think that failed. Yes, but this guy seems to be keeping a very strong poker face. He's not allowing the emotion out. And that can tell things to the players as well. That can still continue on the story and continue on the role playing. For me, it's that initial motivation is a very important step. It's understanding what the NPC is trying to get out of the social encounter. And then that allows the insight roles to actually have some portent and some import, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
now, you could even combine the secret role with what you're saying and have the ultimate granular non-metagaming.
I'm a roll in the open kind of person, so it's too much trouble to be doing secret roles for players. But I think I think you hit it, James. The question isn't, are they lying or not? The question is, do you gain some insight? And so if you are successful, and Eric, you've seen this on occasion, I'll say things like, well, he's twitchy and, he's kind of showing this. And you can now determine on your own, or this is what he said and how he said it. And you go, oh, you can determine on your own if they're lying based on the fact that they're twitchy. They just might be twitchy. But if you got a high roll, you learn something, you notice something about them, and you can use that information however you want to see fit. You're never going to, unless it's just like blowing out of the water and it's an important part of the game, and then everybody's going to metagame it anyway. And I think I've talked in previous episodes, I don't care if you metagame. And say, it's obvious this guy is just like, he is not a good liar. He does not have a poker face because you just slammed that roll and really just took it out of the park. But I roll in the open, and it's what you glean from it. And I guess it's more that psychology. And then you can make your own determination as a player. Did they lie? Did they not lie? Are they being truthful? Who knows? They may sweat just because they sweat, right?
In terms of the other thing Eric alluded to, which is how many people can roll on these things too, is often a difficult thing. If you've got a group of 5 or 6 players, they're all effectively in the same encounter. And so you'll get, I'll see if he's lying. I'll see if he's lying. I'll see if he's lying. And
no piling on.
Eventually it'll pile on. So for me, there's a couple of rules. I do a generally rule of 2, so 2 people can attempt something and then that's it. But the other one is I often will encourage people who are not active participants in the discussion to make those roles, because they're the people that are sitting back and watching, as opposed to in the cut and thrust of the social interaction. And so, again, this is not a bad way to reward players in a role-playing, or rather encourage players who aren't front and center in the role-playing. You can allow them to have the good insight into what's going on. And this happens a lot in a lot of my games, where the characters who are good at perceiving motivations of others are not necessarily the face of the group, which makes it quite interesting when some part of the group knows what's going on, but the person who's doing the talking doesn't. It actually encourages quite complicated role-playing, which is fun.
Yeah, and they just in most games you think about, usually the face skills are tied to a different attribute than the insight or whatever it is. I mean, most games I can think of, they're usually tied. And it makes sense. Like, I think myself, naturally, I can be very persuasive, but I haven't taken body language classes. You know, I watch a body language video and I'm like, oh, wow, that's amazing. Like, I don't know these things. So I think they are very separate skills in that way, in real life and in games.
Very cool. Very cool. So I think, honestly, we talked about some challenges and some recommendations, but I'll just go right and say, okay, let's talk about recommendations for, we don't want to be game masters only, so game masters and players. How do players should approach social encounters? And go ahead.
Before we, I don't know if we were going to talk about this, but with social skills, I often see there's there's two modes, right? There's the low stakes, just kind of general interactions, and then there's the social narrative, kind of like what we brought up in our Savage Worlds to other games, the social conflict, which is like a social set piece. Right. And I think even if games don't have that, I want to reiterate it just again, is that's, I don't know if you wanted to bring this up later, but it seems like we weren't going to maybe pass this over. That's really important, even if your system doesn't have it. And that will really give that conflict, that social conflict, a big thing, where this is something that has real stakes, usually some type of opposing counsel, where there's somebody arguing against them. And this is where the face character really has time to shine and maybe helped by other people. And I think it's really important to set those up like you kind of would think about as a combat encounter. Start thinking about, how can I bring a social, conflict that's like basically combat, right? That has real stakes, that has real consequences that are either good or bad, and that has kind of a dynamic back and forth with some type of enemy combatant, which socially. And I think those are really important to put in to give games more dimension and to spice it up. And you can listen to our Savage Worlds one. I mean, we really talk about it there, but I just wanted to make sure we touch on that, because I really do see the social stuff as those two different separate things.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's in my mind, there's a marked difference between trying to get a 10% discount off the tavern bill to the negotiation out with the big bad to try and ascertain what they're motivating, to try and do that big social crunch. When it comes to those big set pieces, I plan those as much as I would plan a combat encounter. So in terms of getting your virtual tabletop map out and all your tokens and working out what's going to go on there. The big social set piece, which often will take hours to play, because people get really into it and the stress is really high and the stakes are really high. As a games master, putting the proper prep in for those things is really, really rewarding. I use when I'm prepping my social encounters, and perhaps this is a tip for games masters, and we'll get into player stuff as well, but I use the 5 steps of negotiation, which is kind of a bad 80s business kind of technique, where I try to think about these things as a negotiation, because invariably they are. The player will has to convince the king to do something or stand on trial or something like that. It is a negotiated outcome. And so Google 5 steps of negotiation, but essentially there is a preparation or planning phase on this, which for me as a storyteller is about understanding the motivation of the NPC, getting a good idea about what is it that the NPC wants to get out of this interaction. There's a definition of ground rules here, which is generally about diffusing it out of a combat situation, so that often, the players will charge into the lair of the big bad, and there will be a social interaction that you want to do without people just firing, weapons and attacking people. You need to have that lull in the game to allow the social interaction to occur. There's some clarification and toing and froing, which is when you start to get out these dice rolls about insight and motivation. And then there's the bargaining or the actual social interaction, which is where your persuasion rolls tick off. And then the last one is actually closing that interaction about, was everything that was being motivated, did it actually happen or did it not? And so it can be quite a complicated setup, but in my mind, by going through those steps, it makes it a lot easier when you're getting ready to do your big social build-up and your big social conflict. So yeah, have a Google 5 steps of negotiation and see if it can work for you in terms of planning your social encounters.
That's very cool.
And Carl, you've run a bunch of. Savage Worlds has social conflicts, and you've run them. Like, what are your?
Well, I think
or tips on those.
Well, the nice thing about Savage Worlds, the social conflict system, and again, we talked about that in a previous episode. What's nice about it is it solves the big problem of the player having the capability versus the character having the capability, because the social encounter, it's over kind of 3 turns, back and forth. You can give bonuses, again, for good role playing, but then in the end, it's a roll, persuasion, and it's, James, what you talk about, something, the word phrase me, it's
contested
opposed.
roll?
It's an opposed roll. And
when there's an opposed council.
Yeah, it's an opposed roll, and if how good you do versus their roll sets you up with a sort of points, and you do that for 3 rounds, and the more points you get, the more likely it's going to happen what you want to happen.
Whatever you wanted.
Yeah, whatever you wanted to happen. Like, we talk about the court, right? I won my court case, and if I just blow it out of water, maybe the prosecution just decides they're not even going to go forward with it because we're just so good, whatever, right? But I like it because as a system, it solves a little bit of that. It lets people who are good role players and really have a good time get a little bit of a benefit. It allows those who aren't to say, well, I'm going to say this, and I'm going to use that thing that I know about the Duke, and I can just state it and then we go into the roll, and then it's an opposed roll, and we can roll all in the open. I still believe rolling in the open. And then that has a scale associated with it to graduate your success. So it sounds really very much, it doesn't solve all ills, but it sounds like Shane and the folks who put that together, they were trying to, walk through that path of those issues that I identified or we talked about early on. So so I think it's a great, and it's not really tied to Savage Worlds. Go back and listen to that. I think just go listen to that one. And
I think the main takeaway is that as you said, James, these game systems are evolving in this way and recognizing how this is a legitimate form of conflict that can be really interesting. And so I think it's a really good thing to, if you're a GM or a player, to encourage the GM to maybe add, to try to kind of, maybe if you don't do these, to just try them. You don't have to go the biggest, but treat them like you would a combat encounter. Think about, well, I want to get to this place where they have to have this. There's real stakes. Maybe, like we said, there could be degrees of success, which make it, akin to maybe you've gained wounds or HP loss or spent spell slots, right? It's not just a pass-fail state. There's degrees of success, which kind of spices it up, but really approach it like, how can I get them to this part where there is real stakes based on this, and there's maybe a crowd, there's opposing counsel, so it really will give that feeling of tenseness when there is no guns. There's no swords. You really want to have them feel that conflict without there being physical harm. And that will really fleshes out games and kind of and it will make then later on, if that leads to combat or, then you're fighting for something because of that, it'll kind of even give that more weight to it, right? So it kind of, everything feeds itself. So I think it's just a really good thing to spice up game.
My favorite game that I ran, we had a social conflict. It was Savage Worlds, where they were testifying to Congress. Talk about the stakes there they had.
But it's important too when you're doing these big stakes encounters, these big stakes social encounters. It's important not to have it hinge on a singular dice roll as well.
Right. Oh yeah.
These have to be drawn out, multifaceted, multi-phased processes. Otherwise, having it on a success or fail of the faces one dice roll can be very problematic. And ironically, I mean, we've run games in the last year where the very strong social encounters failed multiple times in terms of dropping the ball epically.
That was it was just as fun as if it went the other way. I mean, it totally changed the game right there. So yeah.
And so have it so that there is multiple chances of failure. There's multiple chances of success, and so that you can also play with some of that nuance then, where a failure will put it at a disadvantage for the next stage of negotiation. A success will put you at an advantage to the next stage of negotiation to get what you actually are looking at coming from. And it's important too when you're playing in these and moving away from the storyteller's part of things. If you're a player, one piece of advice I'd give people in social encounters is have a level, a kind of a gradient of what you will accept as success, so that you're not entirely hinged on a singular outcome. Because if you're walking through and saying, I must get this out of this, and then you'll find it a very frustrating process. But if you can have, here's a small win, here's a medium win, here's a big win in your mind, then I think you'll find it more fun when you're negotiating with these nasty NPCs. And it stops you from having the what do you call it? All or nothing kind of scenario.
All eggs in one basket. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So, Eric, you got any other thoughts there?
Well, I think what I cut you off before, you were talking about player hints, or what did you want to bring up then? Tips for players role playing?
Oh, well, I think James kind of started rocking into the players hints. So that's what I was curious if you had any thoughts on it. For me, it's just as a player, just do your best, right? Gaming is fun. It's supposed to be a safe environment. Like I said, if you can't do it, drop out a character and say, here's what I'm saying. And, then you can take advantage of those dice rolls. It's good. And remember your character's got limitations. So even if you are a face character and you're like super persuasive, sometimes you're going to fail. So, and that goes that gradated part of success. But Eric, you are the do such a great job.
The player's player.
You're the player's player. There you go. Yeah. That's a good way of saying it. So what are your thoughts on players or what they should do?
I mean, it's a wide range, especially when it comes to social. And as we said, because it's such a almost emerging, larger mechanic in these games, I think starting with if you're a face character, I mean, as we kind of said before, either you're naturally as a player persuasive, or if you're not, then I think it's important then to, like I said, kind of be more methodical about it. If you're this persuasive person, while you don't have to have the sharpest tongue when you're doing improv, when you're doing role playing, you can still take advantage of, finding pieces of information out, or like maybe asking a GM, like, is there anything I notice about them? And then using that in your persuasion, right? So kind of using multiple skills there to kind of see if there's things that you can use to your advantage. And then doing that maybe out of character, because your character is good at it. But also a thing with the face character is don't hog the spotlight always.
Good one.
Let some of the other characters, because, it isn't just, like we said before, in combat, everybody's doing combat. While the fighter's better at it, other people have their turns too. So don't, and I know it's hard because you're like, oh, I'm the face character, this is what I'm good at. Like, let the other players have their moments to it, like bring stuff in either for good or ill, and maybe even like go to them, be like, hey, you know about this, you're from this town, and then ask them for information. Maybe they have insights that then you can use as a face character. So you're bringing other players in and you're making your character better because you're kind of gaining some insight in some way, because the other characters have more diverse backgrounds that might touch on what you're kind of dealing with. For characters that are not face characters, again, I encourage you to, speak up. Your characters, just because your characters are not the most extroverted, charismatic people, doesn't mean they don't speak. They talk all the time. All these people are always discussing. I mean, you go to anywhere, it's not always the person who's the party person. They're not just talking all the time. So every character, no matter what their type of character they are, has a benefit and like a reason they would to speak up in social interactions. But on the other coin, it's, let the face character, when they really need to at times, let them handle those. You don't want to hog that either. If you're the fighter that's good at fighting, you don't want to just take it away from the face character all the time, because they made those sacrifices to be good at social skills. But like I said, my weird kobold character who is horrible at social skills in James's game, I will then allow him. I will still speak up, even sometimes when I know he might mess up. Like when I was learning Sylvan, I thought to myself, well, I was learning from this one character who would probably only teach me swear words. And so I literally came out and was like, I say like, your mother was this, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I go up to this person, I say, because this is what my character would know. And he's so daft when it comes to social interaction that he didn't realize that would be a faux pas. And so it was a kind of a fun, I thought, like I didn't want to mess it up too much, but I still thought it was a fun storytelling moment that kind of, I did mess things up, but it did take us in a fun direction. So that was kind of a natural thing, but don't overdo it, right? Still let your, in our case, Esmeralda, take the spotlight when it really needs to. But you can always, no matter what you are, you can always bring stuff to the table and you can help out the face character.
And that's an important thing. This is still a troop game, and what you don't want is a 2-hour session of role playing where only one person is speaking.
Yeah.
There are other roles you can take in a social encounter if you're not the face character. You can be you can try and rile up the crowd. You go, hey, he's making a monkey out of us, kind of stuff. You can be that insightful character that tries to get a bit of a hint on motivations. You can be distracting. You can use the social encounter to try and pick someone's pocket, do something else within the space, so that so that you can involve yourself. So and it's important when you're running these encounters as a dungeon master to keep an eye on what the rest of the group's doing and try and encourage those kinds of things. Try and encourage having other things going on that isn't just the monologuing between two of the stronger role players. I think that's the other point. Have things going on in the background. Have things that others could be noticing. Having oppositional stuff that's starting to rise and the other players can be aware of that stuff so that the scene doesn't become a little bit too monochrome, if that makes sense.
Because there's really I can't think of any type of character that wouldn't be able to contribute in some way, either on their own or to help out the face character. I mean, even from, like you said, like an intelligence person could be, researching books and, here's a historical context for this. Or the barbarian could be, just looking intimidating or pushing people out of the way, like you said, like causing a ruckus in the crowd. I mean, pretty much every character can contribute in some way. So either as the player or as the GM, you should be encouraging that from either side.
Very, very cool. So I think we nailed that one. And so I'll go on and say, hey, thanks everyone for tuning in, and hopefully you got something good out of it. Remember to drop by masteringtherpg.com to learn about our projects, support us, contact, all that good stuff. And if you've got a question or a comment or you want something adjudicated, go ahead, send us an email at gamemaster@masteringtherpg.com, or you can find us on Twitter @masteringtherpg, and so you can just drop us a note there. We had some folks send some Twitter messages over, and we answered some questions on that too. So if you like the show, now that we've had a few episodes, we'd love a positive review. Subscribe so I can go to the 12 different places and count, because there's no way to find it all out in one way. But hey, what am I saying here? But once again, I'm Carl with Eric and James. Say goodbye, guys.
Goodbye, guys.
Goodbye. I was trying to do the Dark Overlord, but that was more of a count or something.
You do not have good social. Goblin. Your social role guy.
This time, my minions, I will let you leave here with your lives. Oh, that was embarrassing.
Inside check.
Inside check. All right.
Damn it! I rolled a 2.
We're out.